Hello, everybody. You're all very welcome to this, the Technology Ireland's ICT Skillnet webinar series. It's aptly named the Cybertech Fortnight. My name is Paul Dwyer, and today I'm going to be talking about measuring and managing cyber risk remotely. So I'll start off just a little bit of introduction about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the president of the ICTTF, that's the International Cyber Threat Task Force, and we're a not-for-profit initiative behind many of the largest events over the last 10 years, such as the EU Cyber Summit. And we're now, one of our biggest initiatives is the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course, but you can find out more about that on icttf.org. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own company, which is Cyber Risk International, but how we actually work and help organizations measure and manage cyber risk remotely. So we're going through a little bit of that. So many of you be aware of Cyber Risk International, we're an award-winning company, but you mightn't be aware of Toblerone, our cyber dog, who keeps us going here in the office. And he's a 12 and a half stone Bernese, and he's the life and soul, and looking forward to him coming back after COVID and keeping things going. But look, I'm going to stick straight into the subject matter today. And I'm going to talk about quite a varied amount of things over the next 30 minutes or so, and we'll follow it on with a Q&A session. I'll be talking about Father Ted, I'll be talking about IKEA, I'll be talking about dinosaurs, Minions, even Vivienne Westwood. What I won't be talking about is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I won't be talking about all the scary stuff, right, just to scare you know, I think we're all aware of where the threats are coming from. So I'll factually point out where some of these risks are coming from. But what this webinar is about is actually about sharing the knowledge on what you can actually do about them. So the steps you can take as organizations and to develop strategies to understand your status and be able to formulate plans in order to mitigate those kind of risks. So as I plow on, what I will also talk about is potentially your favorite beer. That is it, Corona. So the elephant in the room is COVID-19. So let me talk a little bit about COVID-19. Obviously, a global pandemic is going to have a significant and huge impact on the business operations of organizations large and small around the world. And that is something that all businesses are dealing with. But the other side of this is, and I've often referred to the bad guys, the cyber bad guys, as evil, because we are seeing what can only be described as evil tactics and evil behaviors coming from the threat actor groups. So all sorts of different scams. It's the old stuff in a new way, but there is a real there's a real element of evilness to this, where they're attacking healthcare entities. They're using the COVID-19 crisis as a way to profit, to be able to scare people. So whatever their motivation is, whether it's to make money, whether it's to terrorize, whether it's propaganda, we get a little bit deeper into that as we go on. But we can see that COVID-19 is being a catalyst for these guys. Many law enforcement agencies and other threat intelligence agencies are measuring the impact of this in the 5, 6, 7, 800% increase in cyber attacks under the guise and under the umbrella of COVID-19 and those kind of scams. So we have to take that into account. But I'm sure, like me and the rest of us, we're all a little bit fatigued with the COVID-19 message, but it is there. We have to acknowledge that this is a factor that we're dealing with. I'm reminded of this phrase: it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change, Charles Darwin. And I think that's very important. This is a time when many businesses, unfortunately, will go under. They will not survive through the impact to the business that COVID is having. But those that are able to adapt and respond quickly, I think, may thrive. Things are going to be done in a different way. There'll be a new business as usual. And dealing with the cyber threat actors, dealing with the operation change of so many working from home. There's many of these changes, many of these influences and these impacts that will be around for a long time post-COVID. And I think we need to be able to embrace those things and deal with them and the risks associated with those and manage them in a strategic way. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go through this. I think it was John F. Kennedy that famously said, in the Chinese language, the word crisis is composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity. And that, of course, is very true of what we're looking at now. There is lots of danger out there from a cyber perspective. I'm not talking about the biological side of things. I'm talking about, the threats that are coming along with the operation environment and the cyber risk and threat landscape we find ourselves in. There's lots of threats there, but there are opportunities for people to adapt and change the business models. We'll go through that. So look, whatever way you look at this, whatever way you look at the situation and the challenge that we all face from a business perspective, some will see it as the end of the world, and they'll simply go, "Hey, listen, I'm not doing anything till things go right back to normal." But there will be those there that are essential business lines or innovative companies that want to get back in and want to adapt the business models, want to help their customers and other businesses survive and thrive through these times as well. And so, what I want to do over the next few minutes is show you some of the techniques you can do and some of the things you can do in order to safeguard yourself in doing that through a global pandemic. So, firstly, there's nothing new with us dealing with cyber threats. I've often referenced this Venn diagram in order to explain to people that there's lots of different threat actor groups. They may be cyber criminals and their motivation may be profit. You may have insiders who are discontented. That's maybe why they want to do something. You may have thrill seekers that just want to do it for satisfaction. We see lots of terrorist related stuff where it's around propaganda, violence. We see the ideological stuff. We see geopolitical stuff from hacktivists and nation states and so on like that. So there's lots and lots of different threat actor groups. And every business, pre-COVID and post-COVID, is dealing with cyber threats. And during COVID-19, you're dealing with an increased amount and probably an increased vulnerability factor insofar as that so many businesses are operating under a different ecosystem and a different model from working from home and so on, and trying to keep their organizations going. So we look at these checklists that are coming out from the likes of Interpol, Europol, even Garda and so on. And I know Mick Govans was on with some brilliant salient advice there in the last couple of weeks on this very webinar series. And the thing is that a lot of this is basic cyber hygiene, but it's even more important now. It's more important now that your employees are savvy, that you're aware of where those risks are and people are vigilant. So I won't delve too much on that because that topic itself has been covered. But what I want to talk about is the fact that we need a strategy. So whatever your strategy was, whatever your business strategy and your cyber strategy was pre-COVID, it has changed. And there's nothing you can do about that. The world has changed in relation to how these things are going to be handled, what you can do, and how you can deal with them, and so on. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. So I need you to think a little bit different. So it's a bit like Dougal here, and the cow and Father Ted. You need to think things a little bit differently. So pre-COVID, I suppose a lot of organizations would have been in a siloed approach to IT security or cyber security and think that it's something that's belonged to IT. But it's not. It's actually owned by the CEO. So we actually see cybersecurity itself as a paradox, almost an oxymoron, almost a contradiction in terms. You see, the term security itself means free from risk. But how can we rely, use, leverage cyber, i.e. the internet, artificial intelligence, big data, apps, everything? How can we do all of this in this interconnected ecosystem and be free from risk? We can't. So it's really about risk management. We have to accept the fact that actually the CEO is the owner of cyber risk, not the IT department. The board is accountable, ultimately, around everything that's going on. And these are all factors that we need to take into account when we're dealing with putting a strategy together to help a business get through this global pandemic, deal with the risks, deal with the massive amount of change that they're going to be taking on board as they go through and reinvent business lines and so on. So it's about the entire organization's capabilities. This isn't just about IT. It's about the enterprise, strategic, commercial, the organizational-wide risk that makes up the entire business. So we see cyber risk as a priority that needs to be integrated as part of enterprise risk management. So think of cybersecurity married together with risk management, and what we're talking about is cyber risk management. So about how to, there is no perfection here. There is no 100% secure. So it's about identifying the risks through an assessment technique, being able to align those risks back to the business goals and be able to manage that and inform the business leaders and what's going on. So we'll get into this a little bit more. So when we break it down, we talk about very simply, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So how can anybody who's charged with or responsible for managing cyber risk, how can they actually deal with that unless they've got some sort of mechanism on how they're actually measuring and what kind of metrics they're using and so on. So let's start off at the very start, what you need to do. So the first thing is you need to understand your cyber DNA. And I'm not talking bits and bytes here, and I'm not talking right down to the weeds here of servers and patches and stuff like that. I'm talking about from a business perspective, what makes up your business. What we're talking about here is what we call inherent risk. and the different things that make up your inherent risk factor. So inherent risk is the cyber-related risk you have based on your business model, based on how you actually operate. So they would be things like, how many staff have you got? What countries do you operate in? How many attacks have you had recently? What kind of, how much of your revenue is done online? How many mobile apps do you use? How much social media presence do you have? Those kind of things are evaluated minus any compensating controls, because they're the things that make up your inherent risk level. Okay, so it's very important. So that quote up there from G7, which is a group of 7 countries, they put together some fundamental advice for the boards of directors of the global 2,000 companies around the world. And it says there, you should evaluate the inherent cyber risk, which is absent of compensated controls, around the technology, the underlying data, and everything that makes a good business. So it's very important before you start assessing anything, you actually understand what risk level your business has from an inherent perspective. And why is that important? Well, one of the reasons why that's so important is because there's a direct relationship between whatever that risk level is and whatever controls and the maturity of those controls you could have in place. So you can think of the control as being a safeguard, and what's the appropriate one to put in your business. Well, that's going to depend on the inherent risk level. So let's say, for argument's sake, that your business is in this region here of minimal. Well, then what you're going to do is you're going to look to build up your cyber risk framework with maturity of controls up to maybe an intermediate level. So if there was 1 to 5 levels, being baseline up to innovative, you're going to make sure that because security maturity is cumulative, you're going to build up from baseline all the way up. But you're not going to go out and start investing in advanced or innovative controls. You're going to build up from baseline to intermediate and make sure that you're measuring up to that risk level. You're also going to need to understand what we call the business value chain. So when you think of your business and it's ABC Limited, whatever, big corporation, big bank, whatever, big manufacturing company, whatever, it's made up of different components. And what we call this is the business value chain. And if you look at this, for example, which is a sample business value chain for a manufacturing plant, you've a research and development department, you've engineering, you've quality assurance, you've manufacturing, marketing, sales, blah, blah, blah. Would you have the same level of security in your research and development department as you would in your customer service department? And the answer to that is no, because what you're going to have is intellectual property, trade secrets, everything that's going on within research and development. And you'd expect to have a higher level of security based on the inherent risk and the risk that's associated with that research and development department than you would dealing with customer service and the kind of data and the kind of assets that part of your business is holding on to. And of course, this business value chain extends way beyond just your own organization, your head office, your regional offices, your data centers, and all those things. It feeds into your supply chain. It feeds into your business partners. All of those levels. These are all elements that make up your business, and they're things that you need to measure if you're going to manage the risk associated with your business working across that area. So from a high level, let's have a quick look at this infographic. At the very top is your business model. And that's whatever your business happens to be. You make widgets, you're a bank, you make bicycles, whatever the hell it is, it's right up at the top. And you're going to need a cyber strategy. And that cyber strategy is going to be, well, our sales force want to use mobile apps, or we want to use big data analytics, or we want to use artificial intelligence and machine learning, whatever. That's all the elements that the business needs, all the cool ICT stuff that they want to use in doing the business. But whatever they're doing, they're going to have to do in line with business, legal, and regulatory requirements. So they're the requirement drivers. In other words, if you're taking in data on a website, you need to do it in line with regulatory requirements, i.e. GDPR and so on. All of those things need to feed into your cyber strategy. And on one side, you have your cyber threat. So you have all the bad stuff that's trying to cause you problems to stop you moving ahead with your ambitions and your plans. And on the right-hand side, you have all the other things that are part of that as well. Your employees, suppliers, internal and external parties, and so on. And that all needs to feed into a cyber strategy that is the board's responsibility so that they can monitor, evaluate, and direct the cyber strategy within the organization. So let's take a different view of it here, right? This is a much more simplistic view. If you think of the wheels on a car, you have the business strategy on one side and you have the cyber strategy on the other. They need to be completely aligned. They absolutely have to be aligned. So if you're dealing with an organization that doesn't have a cyber strategy, or if they're trying to create one or move forward, they have to have one that is aligned completely with the business strategy, or it is not appropriate. It's just a document and it's not appropriate for them. From the top end, the steering wheel, we can think of as cyber governance and oversight. for steering the business as it goes forward using these strategies. And of course, the cyber risk framework is the piece that keeps it all together. That's a nice, simple analogy so we can get our heads around that. Getting into the cyber strategy requirement drivers that I mentioned, we're looking here at, unfortunately, a growing myriad, complex environment of legal, business, and regulatory documents, which are highly complex, overlapping, sometimes conflicting. And the reality is that there's actually over 400 cyber-related standards, laws, regulations from over 175 legal jurisdictions made up of over 10,000 controls. So what I'm trying to emphasize here, that piece here, this is a nightmare. Because what you want to do is whatever you're doing with your strategy, you have to make sure that you're doing it legally. So you might have a strategy and certain controls that are legal in Ireland, but they may not be legal if your business is operating in Russia, for example. I'm just using a real high-level example there for the purposes of the webinar. So wouldn't it be brilliant? Wouldn't it be great if there was just a one-size-fit-all? But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I mean, if it was Vivienne Westwood, I came across this phrase where she said, "I'm not trying to do something different. I'm trying to do the same thing, but in a different way." And that's the story of all cybersecurity standards, security frameworks, all of those things. They all basically have the same heart. They have the same purpose, the same tenements, everything else like that. But they ask the same thing in a different way. We call that the control nexus. So if you even look at one thing here, inherent cyber risk, look at the different way that the NIS directive, G7, GDPR, ISO 27001, NIST cybersecurity framework, or even the FFIC asks you to make sure that you're using an inherent cyber risk metric. They all are asking the exact same thing, but in a different way. So the reality is that complex strategy overhead and requirements overhead that are so complex boils down to the fact of just trying to translate these things together and get that control nexus so that you know the way you're doing the thing actually maps across to all of these areas within the organizations. So now let's think of the board. What are they worried about? Well, what it boils down to is they're worried about preserving value within the business, and they're concerned about creating value. Okay, so it boils down to these two things. They want to make sure that, on their watch, things don't go pear-shaped, and they also want to make sure that they're able to execute the vision and the ambitions of the business and create more value for their shareholders or whatever it happens to be. And if you look at the challenges that the board has, first of all, there's a lack of senior management ownership. Who on the board owns this holistic area of cybersecurity? It's often a challenge. It doesn't sit with one person. It can sit with numerous entities. There's an omission of cybersecurity from entity-level objectives. So the business is turning around and it's going to say, hey, we're going to roll out this new app. We're going to roll out a new business line. We're going to create online banking, whatever it happens to be. But where is the cybersecurity piece tied in with that so that there is a connection there between the two pieces? And that's a challenge for the board. Failure to link assessment findings to key organizational objectives. Again, the same kind of thing. People are constantly going into the board with different technical level reports with all these metrics around CVE vulnerabilities and technical findings and so on. But the board's looking and shrugging their shoulders going, so what? What does that mean? Tie it back to the business. It has to be tied completely back to the business. There's too much focus on internal controls. And that's something we see all the time. It's about, well, this is the way we do it here, but why? Tie it back to the business objectives, and make sure that it has everything. And the key thing I would say, and in this very short webinar, I got to focus in on a couple of key points. And one of the key points I'm going to focus on here is what we talked about is residual risk. So you've got your inherent risk, and then you've got controls in place. And whatever those controls are doing to mitigate that risk, there's a gap. And that gap is called residual risk. And that's what the board needs to understand. They want to know that they're rolling out a new app or a new business line or a new delivery channel, whatever, to the customers, and how much residual risk around cyber is related to that. That's the key thing they want to know, so that they can understand that, as opposed to someone coming in and saying, we found 25,000 vulnerabilities on the network. So what? What does that mean? So let's look at some of the steps the board can take. First of all, collaboration. Collaboration is key to the success of a cyber security framework and a cyber strategy. And they can include what we call the 5 lines of assurance or leverage the 3 lines of defense within that. I'm going to go through this a little bit more in the next 5 minutes or so on that. There should be specific owners for objectives. So if there are objectives tied in with the cyber strategy, make sure there's a human accountable and behind those. Adequate board level expertise. The people on the board should understand cyber risk. They don't need to be technical. You don't need to be a mechanic to bring your car into a garage and get it repaired, but you need to understand the conversation when the mechanic tells you that they have found something wrong within the system. So just from a high level perception and how that relates back to the business is very important. Establish a cyber risk framework with a risk treatment plan. And finally, make sure that the reporting residual risk linked to business objectives, not just subjective numbers and findings that are going back. So this is the key to success. Where do you start? How do you do this? And the key at the end of the day is collaboration. You need to get everybody, the key people across your business working on this. This does not sit with IT. This does not sit with just risk management, does not sit with legal, does not sit with procurement, does not just sit with human resources. It sits with all of these entities and more within your business. This is holistic right across your enterprise. And you need to get everybody involved. And that's the key to success. You will not succeed unless you get everybody involved and everybody helping out, because they see the business from a different perspective. Marketing people will see it from one perspective, financial, another, legal, another, human resources, procurement, dealing with the supply chain, managing risk. They all see things from a different area. So I want to quickly talk about what I call meaningful cyber metrics. So I mentioned things like CVE vulnerabilities from vulnerability scans. And I'm not going to get technical because I know we've got a different kind of audience on here today. But what we're talking about is somebody coming in with technical numbers and saying, hey, we've got 5,000 level 3s, 2,000 level 1s. They're in this product, they're in that product, and so on. But what does that mean to the business? So what you need to do is agree some key metrics like inherent risk, residual risk, maturity levels, KPIs, key performance indicators, and key risk indicators. This kind of dashboard that the board will understand, and they'll be able to say, okay, why are we carrying so much residual risk in our UK operations? What can we do to deal with that? Who's behind that? What's needed? What kind of budget? What kind of input? How can they support getting those things sorted? So you need business level graphics and metrics when going in to the board so that you can empower them to make the decisions in order for them to execute their business plans and their business strategy. And cyber supports that. So here's a high level infographic, and I'll be happy to share this with anybody if you want to reach out to me afterwards. Let me walk you through it very quickly for the purpose of this. At the very top, every business will have a vision, and that vision will be listed with a mission. So let's say, for example, somebody wants to be the best bank, and the mission is to create an online bank. And then number 3, they're going to create some goals, and all businesses will have different goals associated with that. And let's say, for example, the goal is, well, we're going to create our own internal security operations center. So there'll be key objectives related to that. Like I say, there's 2 kinds of objectives: value preservation and value creation. And behind every objective, there's going to be outcomes. What does good look like? Describe that. Have that listed so you know what success looks like. You would then employ the tactics, which are in 6, which would lead to the sort of more minutiae of key actions. And all of those things are related to the controls that are in your cyber risk framework. And they should be mapped all the way back up to those goals so that you can report back to the board. So in a nutshell, and forgive me, I know I'm going pretty fast through this because we've a fair bit of content. But what we're talking about here is the fact that you can tie back the residual risk and the metrics, cyber-related metrics of any controls back to the business objectives. That's key. That's all you need to get out of that diagram. And like I say, happy to share that with you. You can reach out to me and I'll pass it on to you. So boiling down, business cares about 2 things: value preservation and value creation. So you need a plan. And you need a plan on how you're going to understand how to deal with this challenge. And for those of you who don't know what that building is, that's our mighty children's hospital. And some would say that lacked a plan, because what you need is a plan with a timeline, with a budget, with people that are accountable. So if that's the poster child for how not to do things, what you want to do is you want to be able to make sure that you have a plan that is appropriate, that is practical, that given all the circumstances, that it's something that's feasible for the organization to do. There is no point in writing up a great scheme of having the most secure and complex cybersecurity framework and ecosystem in the world if you do not have the budgets for it, if you do not have the people. It also has to be graded into short term, medium term, long term. How quickly can you do these things? What impact will it have on the business? What does it support on the business? All of those things. So you want to document those things out on that piece. So the World Economic Forum suggests that the best way to do this is actually with a cyber risk assessment. They refer to it as the vaccine for companies in the fourth industrial revolution. And they talk about that fact of like, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you are? So step one, work out where you are. What's your inherent risk? What's your current maturity? What's your residual risk? Then what are you trying to achieve? Because you can build all of that into the strategy and how you're going to get there. So let's look at it in a nutshell now. I'm going to wrap up some of the key characteristics of a cyber assessment. So the first thing is, if you go to do an assessment, make sure it's holistic. There is no point, and we need to get the lexicon straight on this, because that's one of the challenges of the world of cyber and cybersecurity is the different way people use key phrases. So when I'm saying a cyber assessment, I'm talking about a business level assessment across how you operate your business and the risks associated with that holistically across your business. There's no point in going in and just measuring the cyber risk in the IT department if you're not looking at how procurement takes on suppliers, if you're not looking at how you report cyber risk metrics in internal audit up to the board, if you don't look at how you do incident handling, if you don't look how you collaborate and work with others and so on. So be holistic right across the business in whatever approach you take. Second point, use meaningful metrics. Use something that the business will understand. Do not go in and say level 3 CVE vulnerability to a board member. What you need to be able to do is turn it into something where they'll understand, and they will understand terms like inherent risk, maturity, residual risk, but they will especially understand if you tie those metrics back to internal namings of systems. So if you have a system, for example, the online banking system, you say, hey, I know we want to do an upgrade on the online banking system, but the residual risk around that is made up of these things, and we can't go live with it until they're handled. Then people will understand that, and the business will understand that. So make sure it's meaningful. Do not use technical jargon. Break it down into business language and relate it completely back to the business. Privacy. Privacy is so important to take into account. You need to bake it in right through everything that's being done within your cybersecurity, risk, and privacy framework, because all of these things should be in one. There is absolutely no point in having resourcing up a whole privacy function within your business, and they're all working again on privacy. There's another function working on risk, and there's another one working on security. It's all the same subject matter. It's protecting the information assets of the organization and making sure they're aligned with the regulations from a business perspective and a legal perspective and so on. So make sure everybody is on the same page. So make sure you embed privacy into your cybersecurity risk framework. And if you're a global enterprise, make sure you do that from a global perspective and the different levels of privacy around the world and the different burdens that brings along with it. Converge the worlds. So by that I mean, I'm talking here about converged security. I'm talking about the physical world and the cyber world. There is no point in having state-of-the-art firewalls, state-of-the-art security operations center, everything else like that, but yet somebody can walk in your front door, pick up a laptop and walk out. You need to involve the physical world of security with the cyber world. You need to make sure that I've used a real sort of pedestrian example there, but this gets more complex when you get into educating your staff on them understanding when they're in the real world and they're at home in an evening and they're chatting to someone on Facebook that they are targets because on their LinkedIn profile, it tells them what business they're working for, what bank and so on. So you need to get all of this together on one page. There's no point in fighting on different beachheads. You have to get this all together in one place. Be collaborative, not just internally, but externally. Collaborate externally with your business partners, collaborate with the sector, collaborate with anybody who is a stakeholder in your success and their success. There's a massive, I suppose, obvious connotation with the fact of COVID-19 and the impact and the contagion fact of that, with exactly the same thing with cyber attacks. And this is why we call them viruses. Let's remember that, because they spread, and you can have somebody very small in the chain that has an issue, and they may affect the complete supply chain right across. So we have to make sure that we're raising the game for everybody. We've seen that with COVID-19 and the funds being put together to bring up the poorer countries and so on. So security is only as good as the weakest link. Choose whatever metaphor you want. But the reality is that you being secure in a building on your own and being smug about how secure and mature your cybersecurity framework is no good if you can't work with people. If you've built yourself into a castle with a moat around it, You have to exchange information. You have to work with people. So you need to make sure that there's a transparency and an honesty and a trust there, that people can work together to deal with whatever those challenges are. Have priorities such as resilience. If you happen to be in the financial service sector, you're going to know, for example, that the ECB, the European Central Bank, are pushing hard about cyber resilience and those things. So make sure you've got those key areas up on top. Make sure you've incorporated your entire business value chain within this. Don't just do one sub-office and think you're done. Don't just do the business a mile wide and an inch deep. Break it down, measure your business value chain across all the different things, and have a model that you can rinse and repeat. Make sure that this is a repeatable process that you do quite easily going forward, and you can report back to the business on how improvements are being done, or if there's any changes in the business, how that has impacted your risk posture, and that goes on. And agree metrics, because the board will remember and the business will remember those key numbers and those key risk indicators, so that you can warn the business of anything that's changing going on. And translate the touch points. Make sure that you know where there's efficiencies to be driven here. That's within technology and within regulations. If you have a team working on one set of controls around privacy and somebody else is doing it over here in relation to a security framework, make sure that they have mapped across the touch points and you're driving efficiencies. And the same thing with technology. Make sure you're leveraging the technology, and that if there's an intelligence feed built into one of the systems that you bought, don't go off and buy another intelligence feed. Make sure you're leveraging it of something you've already invested in. So what we're talking about here is, the thing that fits all of those marks is our own solution, actually, which is CyberPrism. You can find out more about that on cyberprism.com. I've been asked just to tell you about the other upcoming webinars. So as you get your questions ready, I'll let you just take in some of those upcoming ones. I see Michael Conway's on. He's a brilliant speaker. So is Brian Honan and so on. So there's some great sessions coming up there that you can enjoy as well through this Skillnet webinar series. So happy now to take any questions. I think I was just about within the 30 minutes. So I see one question in relation to how to engage with CyberPrism. Happy to take that offline. Again, look, you can just go to cyberprism.com. We have a starter pack situation where we work with clients remotely. It's a completely collaborative tool, so your team can be spread right across the world, and we're helping businesses across Ireland and across Europe and across the world doing this, because the software itself actually facilitates breaking down your teams into handling different sides of the assessments and so on. So you can find out more of that. Happy to work with that. So I have another question here. Do I have any examples of KPIs or relevant metrics that SMEs could use? Yeah, I mean, okay, a lot of that is quite specific in relation to what your performance would be. So if you've measured yourself up to a certain level, then the performance indicator may be within X months, we're going to get Y% better. They may be the performance indicators you're going to use. What I would suggest is you don't start getting down into a deep level of control efficiency and putting lots of effort in, especially for an SME. What an SME should be doing is making sure they have basic cyber hygiene in place. Here's the fact of the matter is that most threats are carried out because they don't have basic baseline controls in place. And for example, when we actually perform a CyberPrism assessment, we assess across 5 different maturity levels in organizations. And we go into some super complex organizations, large, blah, 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 massive teams, huge budgets, all that good stuff, right? And you go through, but you spot the baseline controls are missing. And 9 times out of 10, that's where the cyber threats are coming from. That's what's being exploited. So I would say that to start off, do a baseline analysis to make sure you have those things as a KPI, and then tie your KRIs into that piece. Yeah, so someone's asked me just to go through the car wheel slide again, so I'm happy to do that. I will just go through that piece again, because for me, I am a big fan of simplicity. So I came up with this car slide thing because when I was explaining to people why it's so important. So let me give you the scenario here. You go into a business and they want to talk to you about getting security and how they're going to build a framework and all the security controls and so on. And the first question we were to ask them is, well, do you have a business strategy? I said, yes. And here's our business strategy. We are going to be the following business. We're going to expand into 5 countries. We're going to take on X amount of staff. We're going to win X% market share. That's all our business strategy. That's fantastic. Now show me your cyber strategy. Show me your plans to support the business strategy. So up at the boardroom table, the boys and girls up there are developing these great ambitious plans to take over the world and to execute the business vision and everything else like that. But they cannot do it. They cannot do it unless they are supported from a cyber strategy point of view. And a cyber strategy encompasses risk, governance, privacy, all the pieces that will facilitate it working. So those two things have to be reflective of each other. They have to support each other completely. So so you've got those two things aligned like the wheels of a car, so the business can move forward. And the steering wheel is the board. You get your CEO, your chairman. You've got who are accountable for all of this, and they're moving that together. And how do they do that? They do that because they have a cyber risk framework that ties it all together. So that's what brings it right into shape and into perspective at that point. So hopefully, Annette, that makes a bit more sense on the second run through. Where do you start with something like this, and who should be involved? And I can see that is a sort of theme between a couple of these questions coming in. And the reality is that if you're the person charged with developing a cyber strategy or a cyber risk framework, you have to start with doing that assessment piece. But you need to collaborate and get everybody involved. So that's, I would say, is key. So wherever you sit within the business, you need to get a consensus and the inputs from those other business leaders that will help you, whether it's legal, whether it's human resources, whether it's IT, whether it's whatever, and be able to pull that together. Generally, we find there's about 5 areas within the business. You've got an area maybe covering off audit, governance, risk, all that kind of area. You've got someone around cybersecurity controls. You've got someone around procurement. You've got someone around incident response, and then somebody maybe around the policy and the more human element of it as well, and dealing with all that. But I think you can appreciate from going through these slides, there's so many different parts involved in this, physical security as well. So this is very much a collaborative approach. How much should we budget for cybersecurity, and how does the CISO get buy-in? But I think we've covered off that the CISO buy-in is when you convince the business that you're their enabler. You're the one that's going to make their mission complete. You're going to make sure that the way it works off. We see lots of different numbers going around about budget percentages and percentages of IT budget. But really, it's going to be different for every business. But if the business understands that you're enabling whatever their ambitions are, so that they understand that they can measure that back. So I think that's about management as well. I know the numbers that get bandied around by the bigger companies are around, 20% of IT budget, those kind of things. But really, it depends on the organization. But I think you have to have that business conversation to convince the board to back the CISO. So with that, I will stick to our timings and hopefully talk to you soon, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programs. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.